We've often heard the statement, prepare and plan for a rainy day. While it generally refers to setting aside some money to deal with emergencies and eventualities, it may also apply to businesses. The crux here is planning for an emergency or a situation where you'll not be able to operate as usual. We are unfortunately in the midst of one such scenario. The scale and magnitude is something that we've never seen, nor probably we have dreamt of. But it underscores the importance of planning for the worst and preparing for a disaster. This is where business continuity planning plays a very important role. To understand how to go about one and understand also the contours of such a plan, we have with us today Gerald Manoharan, partner JSA, and Monesh Dange, partner and national leader advisory markets EY India. Welcome everyone to this webinar. Thank you, Monesh and Jerry. Let me start off with, Monesh, give me a general view about what you think is the economic situation like and the kind of challenges that we have at the moment.
Absolutely, and thank you, Pran. Thanks for having me over on this show. Obviously, I think in the current scenario, there has been a downslide on the economic front. And the downslide in many ways you can say is driven by the response government has taken in relation to the pandemic. Many of the actions are mandated, and the situation is such that most of us are in a obey mode to government orders, and that is impacting our lives, our businesses, and also the day-to-day activities in relation to how businesses are progressing. If I have to tie that back to what you just said in your introduction, obviously that has derailed a lot, something that none of us had the opportunity to plan for, none of us had the opportunity to foresee, and therefore it obviously means that we were not prepared for something like this. And in the same tone, I would say that the other side of the coin is the government too. They were not prepared for something like this. So it's obviously been done taking the holistic interest in mind, and dealing with the pandemic has been one of the most important objectives right now. All actions being taken by various components in the ecosystem of which we are part of is all they have to play in tandem in order for all of us to get out of this situation. And preparedness and ensuring that there is a bit of continuity in our businesses and in the way we plan it is very instrumental in getting back on rails.
Right. Jerry, good to see you finally. I think you are on mute, but I think you'll have to unmute yourself. And, the same question to you. What is your general view on what we are facing now and what kind of challenges are there for businesses?
I'm audible now?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. Thank you. So first of all, Pran, thanks to all of you for having me on this discussion, and good to have Monesh also with us on this discussion. I think this is rather the first time the global economy, the global society is facing a pandemic of this size and of this impact. Several other health-related pandemics have been localized. People have been able to contain them relatively quick. But what is happening with this is that it is actually throwing out a very different aspect of our interdimensional dependencies in the world economy, basically. So about 80, 90 years ago, when you had several plagues, the constitutional structure which existed in the society was very domiciliary in nature. Economics were very domiciliary, very contained. But today what we are beginning to see is that there is a lot of international traffic and international commerce that is happening. And therefore, the dimension of an epidemic like this, with over 7 billion people in the globe, is having a huge impact on the way we are approaching this pandemic. And I think this is why every economy, every country, whether developed, developing, or underdeveloped, is facing a crisis and trying to find a meaningful way to deal with this. I don't think any government was equipped. Some governments believe they were over-equipped. Some continue to remain under-equipped even as we speak today. But the factor is that we have to deal with this not only from an economic point of view, which is definitely very important, but even greater issue is in terms of the health impact it is going to have, and also the social stability point of view. Already in India, we are seeing a large amount of issues with migrants, with the unorganized sector. And I'm sure that this is only going to deepen as the crisis gets worse. I hope that the COVID curves flattens and we're able to find solutions. And as some people have said, we have to start living with this reality and be prepared for it at all times.
Right. Thank you, Jerry. Monish, we can come to you. Let's get down to what this webinar actually is about. Uh, till 2 months back, you know, knowledge and information about BCP was unheard of. It was primarily for, something for a bigger firm to think about BCP, but not for the smaller ones. So help me understand, what does BCP really entail? What are the parts to it? How does one go about, having a BCP? What are the steps to follow?
Yes, Pran. So I think given that we are looking at the entrepreneurial community here, I would probably go one step back and look at a very simple incident in a typical Indian business environment. Let's say if there were to be a Hindu undivided family, a HUF kind of a structure, and business is as usual. There's a lot of brimming business, and one fine day the karta of the HUF unfortunately passes away. So what does the HUF do? How does it reconstitute itself? It will refer to something, right? It will refer to what's been written in terms of the procedures to be followed in that eventuality. So I would try to probably draw a parallel to that in terms of what a business continuity plan is. In very simple words, you have a business, the business needs to continue. And if there were a vagary, if there were to be a situation, under that situation, how does that business respond? And how does it protect itself? How does it protect its customer community? How does it protect its employee community? How does it continue to operate in the wake of unplanned situation? So that is what really a BCP or a business continuity plan is about. In many larger organizations, you will see varying degrees of maturity in terms of how this is articulated, how this is written down, how this is converted to procedures and enshrined into a formally documented business continuity plan. Now, for smaller businesses, maybe this has not seen the light of importance. Maybe this was never deemed necessary before, but this is really a big wake-up call for businesses of any shape, size, and form to look at themselves internally and to decide what is the basic mantra that will keep the businesses going on in any eventuality. And mind you, this is not really anything to do with coronavirus or the current pandemic. This is just a wake-up call. It could happen in any form and size. It could happen in any scale in the times to come. So how do you make your business resilient to anything happening around the business is what a business continuity plan is about, Pran.
Right. So we'll get into the details a bit later. Jerry, if I can come to you, is it is it mandated by law to have a BCP? What does it look like in terms of the legal framework? Jerry, if you can hear me?
Am I audible?
Yes, now you are. We seem to have
Okay,
lost
sorry, I
you.
think there's been a bit of a network issue. I'm sorry
Yes.
about that. Yeah. So the law does not mandate a BCP or for companies to have business continuity plans. Very often, policies of large companies do factor in a BCP protocol, which is an integral part of your boardroom dynamics because it works across board. It works from an operational point of view, from an employee point of view, right up to matters relating to succession and leadership of business. Listed companies are encouraged to have good BCP plans, both for operational matters, financial matters, and for leadership matters. And what we are also beginning to see is larger SMEs and mid-level kind of SMEs are also beginning to have some kind of BCPs. Technology companies basically have very strong operational BCPs because they are able to switch off at one location and switch on in another location and remotely use their resources to be able to work efficiently. As you are aware that the present COVID-19 was an excellent example of that, with even companies like TCS now taking decisions that they will move more than 70% of their employees to work from home. So there is, a very clear policy approach to BCP across companies, and that is what continues to prevail.
Right. So, Monesh, I am a small business guy. I have no idea. So you explained what BCP is all about a little while ago. Now I don't know how to draw that up. Okay, I know the definition now, but I don't know what goes into it. What is the first word that I write?
So I think, if we have to put that in a few simple steps, I think we'll have to see what are the ingredients of my business, right? The ingredients of my business are: one is my people, two, if I'm a manufacturing company, it's my equipment, it's my materials, it's my supply chain. I need money to run my business, so it's the capital part. And then I have a stakeholder ecosystem with which I need to communicate. So I think the step one really is to draw down who are the constituents of your business and what are the constituents of your business. So the broad segregation between the inanimate parts of your business and the animate parts of your business, because both of these require differential handling, right? And then last but not the least, the regulatory side of it and the compliance side of it, all these pieces as well. And finally, if you look at and encompass all of these into one single bucket, I think technology and digitization also has a role to play, and it's become an integral part of how businesses interact as well as conduct business. So even the implications from a technology perspective also do need to be taken care of. So to reiterate what I have just said, Pran, I think it is simply put, step one would be to enumerate the constituents of our business that we are running on a day-to-day basis. And for each one of those constituents, we then need to go down into step two, which is to really articulate in a business as usual situation how things are functioning, what are the variables that impact the day-to-day and the BAU functioning of these pieces. If any one of those constraints were to kick in, or if any one of those variables were to move left or right, what is the implication it has on that particular vector of my business? And therefore then the next step is to draw down the contingency measure, saying that if one of the levers fail or one of the levers get impacted, what is the rebuild plan? How do I resuscitate my business? Do I need to ventilate my business? Do I need to fuel capital? Do I need to reroute my supply chain? Do I need to additionally motivate my people? If four of my team members have fallen ill, then what is my contingency plan for keeping productivity high? So we'll need to get down to this level. So it's a simple three-step process: identify and enumerate your business levers, two, to draw down the BAU situation, and to three, write down the impact of what happens when a BAU situation gets impacted.
Right. Jerry, now I'll come to you. I will talk about some aspects with Monesh in a while again. He talked about regulatory and compliances. What can some of this, I wonder?
Sorry, can you come back with your question? I lost your last part.
Yes, yes. Monesh talked about, there are going to be regulatory and compliances issues as well. What can they be? What are some of the things that I will need to keep in mind?
See, primarily, I'd like to place them in three major buckets, right? The first bucket will be the operational regulations which are inherent to a company. So, for example, if I am a manufacturer or if I'm an industry manufacturing some goods, right, there will be certain very specific regulations which I may need to follow. For example, if I'm a manufacturer of pharmaceutical products, then there are a bunch of regular, returns and filings that I will need to do. I will need to make sure that the performance protocols of my manufacturing unit complies with law. Another example that I may give you is if I'm a beverage industry, right? I will have to make sure that the beverage which comes out of the business or the industry continues to maintain absolute quality and compliances as stipulated under law. So these are largely operational statutory regulations which are very, very important. Okay, there is so if you fail to comply with them, there is a very high possibility of proceedings being initiated against you. There could be penal consequences against the directors of the business. Plus, you are probably opening your door to quality-related disputes as well across your supply chain, leading down to your customer. The second issue is in terms of labor-related compliances, right? Now, we are a country which, enterprises across the country are governed by over 30 plus different types of labor laws, right? Now, while we would have liked to have a moratorium with respect to the applicability of labor legislations during this period, what the government did right in the very beginning is they said that you will not have any flexibility in the manner you deal with your workmen and workers. Very stringent kind of an approach. While today we have just read that the UP government has come up with something a little different, where they put a lot of the labor laws in abeyance. So this again, impacts any entrepreneur or any business quite severely, because they suddenly feel that one area of significant cash outflow, which could have been tightened, which could have been moderated, they are unable to do so. So that becomes an issue. The third aspect of regulatory compliances are the normal structural regulatory compliances. If you're set up as a company, you are required to follow a bunch of regulations under the Companies Act. You'll need to hold your board meetings. You will have to make sure your shareholders' resolutions are passed on time. You make the necessary filings, right? And you keep track of your corporate compliances from a Companies Act point of view. Similarly, if there are other structural statutes which are applicable, which will require you to, for example, if you're an NBFC, you're operating, a microfinance entity, then vis-a-vis RBI, you will need to continue to maintain your filings. Because unfortunately, you don't get a moratorium or there is no stipulated moratorium as such under the law, which allows you to stay away from complying with these requirements. If the law says that a certain return has to be filed before September of every year, it has to be done unless there is an extension. And as you are aware, in some cases, so the extensions have been allowed. The Companies Act has now allowed, video conferencing to be held for shareholders meetings. Then the second point, for example, SEBI has come up with a lot of relaxation in some of its applicable, regulations. So these are all very useful. But these are the broad-based compliances which I think which any entity will have to continue to maintain.
Right. Monesh, if I can come to you now, you talked about certain provisions where certain happenings, but till now BCP is largely around, say, one specific event, say a flood or a natural calamity or a fire, something of that sort. But what we are seeing now is disruptions across the chain, and not just supply chain. In that case, you have people, HR, medical issues in it. So in that sense, Does actually BCP modeling also need a drastic change from what we were doing initially?
No, of course, indeed it does, Pran. So if you look at what happened, and I probably take us down the memory lane a couple of years ago when GST was, you know, rolled out in our country. I think many large corporations completely re-looked at how their supply chains were working, what their distribution network should look like, and we also witnessed a lot of centralization of warehouse locations and all of that to align to how the legislations were drawn out. So if I take a cue from that, and if I look at what's happening today, I think today, because of health related issues, concerns, fears, that needs to be re-looked at. I think businesses will look at whether they should decentralize the warehouses. Again, they should re-look at their supply chains again. What has already been very nicely done in terms of streamlining the legislation and the taxation around it is now getting down to malleating the supply chain nuances around it, the people nuances around it. All of these will start evolving, and what we are witnessing right now is a new phase of the evolution every day. So whatever may be our level of preparedness for the situation as it stood yesterday is never going to be sufficient when we look at what's unfolding with every passing day. I think there's a huge expectation that the curve will flatten out pretty quickly, things will get normalized. So the coming together of the, like Jerry was saying, the various extensions or the various relaxations is a demonstration of the fact that the government is keeping its eyes and ears open to the realities on the ground and how it can support the entire economy and the ecosystem in the best possible manner. uh, and to that extent, what I would say is it is up to the businesses to also keep a close watch on what is it that is coming out as a support policy from the government, and how do businesses leverage them in the most efficient manner possible. That is going to be a very important aspect to consider while drawing out our sort of continuity plans as well, because the government is also taking a lot of actions in this direction. A lot of announcements are being made. So we could have two types of businesses. One, which are unprepared, who don't want to be prepared and who want to say that probably the environment is not conducive to continue doing our businesses. And two, a separate category of businesses, which is what we want everybody to be in, is to be appreciative of the fact that there is meaning in the business model, the purpose for which this business was set up. And here is an operating environment which has changed. There are new variables, there is a new normal, but at the same time, there are also emerging support policies, emerging empathy levels, emerging, readiness levels in terms of people wanting to be far more productive than they were before, and corresponding support policies that are coming from our, governing system as well. So a good blend of all of this will permit a reasonably quick revival in my view, and I think it'll all point to how well your planning is. I know a little has been spoken about the money aspect of business until now, but it is very important for businesses to take stock of their short-term liquidity positions, to look at how are they going to alter the mechanisms and the construct in which their working capital needs are met. And when I say that, what I mean is that your working capital needs are no longer constant. You need to reassess it. You need to look at what has changed, how to alter your business model to look at revised working capital levels, and then combine that with opportunities available in the revised scenario to be able to draw down short-term liquidity positions as well.
Right. We'll come back to the financial part in a bit. Jerry, if I can come to you, you know, as far as I understand from what you spoke earlier, there is no going back saying that, because of the pandemic, I could not follow a law. That would not count as an excuse. If that is the case, what are some of the compliances that someone should absolutely look at when it comes to BCP? And given what you've seen now, is there ways we can get around it, say use greater use of technology or something like that?
So maybe I should have clarified a little more in my last response. See, regulators always have the discretion, right? They always have the discretion to give us time or to allow us delays. So, for example, one important change which was brought about is the whole pandemic. The whole time the courts are being shut, that period is taken into account for the extension.
Uh, I think we have a slight disturbance at Jerry's end. Okay, I think. Okay, so I think we have a slight disturbance at Jerry's end, and we'll wait for him to come back online. Uh, Monesh, if I can come to you in the meanwhile, what are some of the financial things that I would need to keep in mind when I am doing my BCP?
So I think there are, like I said, I already touched upon short-term liquidity plan, but I think there are 3 or 4 very critical pieces that we need to consider when we look at a BCP in a financial context. First off, we need to look at every business would have had a plan, a business plan, I mean, and every business would have had some budgets, which would be the guiding principle or the guiding light for the business to carry on, its conduct. Now, the impact on the budgets and the impact on the business plans will be the most immediate starting point for any business. What is this pandemic, what is the situation doing in relation to how my original budgets look like? What was I planning to achieve as a business this year, or on whatever horizon, depending on the speed of business, whether you're assessing your business on a quarterly basis, on a half yearly basis, or an annual basis, those plans need to be redrawn in the light of what's happened. Starting point number one. Secondly, I think the situation also has presented a lot of unforeseen, unheard of, and never experienced before type of risks to the business. Those risks are essentially of 2 types. One is a financial risk to the business. Two is the operational risk to the business. So once you re-looked at your budgets and your business plan, then you get down to assessing what are the risks that are there on the business, both financially and operationally. Finally, people part and supply chain part need to be looked at from a quantifiable perspective. There is, as far as people are concerned, there is a line of empathy between compensating people and re-looking at what are the people related costs to the business and how does one deal with it. Similarly, on material and supply chain side, there are concerns such as what happens to the material if it is not received on time. There are delays in logistics. What is the impact based on that? Do I reroute? Do I draw in some clauses in my contract to claw back to redo my material purchases, etc.? How do I keep my production lines running? What is the impact it has on my investments in relation to my machinery, so on and so forth? So this is the third point. And finally, all these 3 vectors boil down to quantification of what is my minimum baseline of money required to keep my business chugging along at this point of time. And one must not forget, in this entire equation, customer is very important, because the source of money has to be an alternate source if your customer is not paying on time. And we know that everyone's liquidity is under stress right now. So to draw a fine balance between what I can do in relation to my customer outstandings and complement that with available mechanisms to obtain capital or borrowings, as the case may be. So this
Right.
would be the top 4 steps. I think we have Jerry back in the meanwhile.
Yes. So, Jerry, before we lost you, you were talking about, the role of regulators and, how they can tweak laws and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there is a discretionary element that is available. So, it's not that the government is going to come and squeeze our neck if there is going to be a delay. And of course, we are not looking at very extended delays, right? Even if there's a worst case situation, some officer who's extremely stringent, there could be a bit of a penalty which is levied for a delay. Or even if you find that particular levy of penalty also unreasonable, there is obviously an appellate provision that is available in most of these regulations. So there I don't see too many concerns. But where I do see concern are, operational issues or operational licenses which a company will require to keep its business running. It could be an FMCG. You will probably need, an ongoing license or an approval to be renewed with the FDA. Or if there is any other, if it's a pharmaceutical company, there are licenses which need to be renewed. Now, those kind of operational licenses, I think, will have to be maintained and kept up to date. And this becomes a very critical part of your BCP, because this is like, as much as you need the liquidity to run the business, for you to be able to continue production, these licenses will be required. Otherwise, you'll never be able to ship or transport your products outside of your factory or your business. So those things will have to be kept in mind. And as Monesh rightly mentioned, you need to have, when a BCP plan is being written, you have the, like now with COVID, you have the red zone, you have the orange zone, and you have the green zone. So you will have similar zones, right? You will have a red zone, which is absolutely mandatory. You cannot do away with it, right? You will have to make sure that it is complied. For example, in the present scenario, if someone was to come and tell me, can I defer my provident fund contribution by 2-3 months? In the absence of a specific waiver which is given by the Provident Fund Department, I really can't do it, because I will have to remit the Provident Fund under law within 30 days, okay, of the salary being paid to a certain employees. So these kind of things will have to be, constantly watched. And there are, when the BCP is being drawn, whether it is in the COVID situation or in any other situation, you put out a checklist and you say, irrespective of what it is, these 10 items or 15 items will have to be top priority for the company, right? You will have your billing, you'll have your recovery, you'll have your payment of tax, your refund. These are, and in addition to that, your upkeep of your licenses and making sure that your operations don't get affected. So that has to be kept in mind.
Right. So I largely get an idea about what BCP is all about now. But Monesh, now if I come to you, is BCP more forward looking? Because okay, we have a situation now, suppose where I run a business and I have dwindled my cash reserves and there is not much liquidity in my business now. Will drawing up a BCP at this point of time really be of any help to me? Is it more forward looking, or can it tackle, the problems that I have had till now if I run a small business?
So I think I'll draw some inspiration from what Jerry just said. I'll just like that reference to the red, orange, and green zones. If I just try to put those three zones in a time scale and try to put one word each into those from a BCP perspective, I would probably say now, next, and beyond. So now is really the red part, which is really what do I really need to do now? And if I don't do something right away, it's really going to have a killing impact on my business. The next is just following the now, which is what happens when things slightly smoothen down, things are a little eased up. My recovery is far more easier than in a constrained situation or a heavily constrained situation, which I'm in right now. And then the beyond, which is in a hopefully a completely BAU model. When there's opportunities galore, we have a completely opened up economy. International cross-border trade is all as smooth as it was before, etc. So if you put this in three, time scale buckets, and these time scales could be very different for each of the businesses, each type of business, the nature of commercial activity involved, so on and so forth. So the way I would look at it is, yes, it has a time scale connotation, it has a severity connotation, and the relevance will be very personalized to each business. It's not going to be a one size fits all. It's going to be very individualistic to the specific business and the ethos that the business follows in terms of getting back on rails.
Right. Jerry, if I can come to you after hearing what both of you have said, can there actually be, a realistically a recovery plan to deal with a crisis of this magnitude, where everything seems to have stopped?
So, Pran, the one way I look at it, right, and there is a sense of optimism in this, is that I am not alone in this mess.
Right.
The whole world is in this mess, and I'm a part of it right now. So it is not that it is not an isolated situation of a BCP. So, for example, when the tsunami hit certain coastal countries, so those companies which were exposed to tsunami, the only ones who were isolated. They had the world crumbling on them. They had to come up with BCP innovations all last minute. But that is not the case here, except for some countries which seem to be, slowly getting back to recovery mode. Most of the countries are, in the red zone. And with India's dependencies on countries like United States and some of the European countries, I think, we are all in the same situation. So therefore, it's not that bad. Okay. And to answer your question, right, is there any way to resolve this? Is there a way that one can look optimistically towards this? I think, and also to take a cue from the earlier question that you raised is it too late for me to write a BCP plan now, right?
Yeah.
For companies, and Monish and you, Pran, would have seen this, is companies keep rewriting their BCP plans on a yearly basis because it is nothing but a docket of learnings, right? So in today's situation, I don't expect many of our companies, MSMEs, smaller startups, or even our successful startups who have written out this BCP already. Okay, and therefore what I think is very essential is a few elements, right, which will help them to evaluate. So the first thing that comes to my mind is there are four basic, goal posts which I think will work here. One is survival, followed by sustenance, and then you come to stability and obviously growth. Now, a lot of our companies could be on the survival mode. They just want to make sure that bills are paid. They want to make sure that probably production is not running 100%. Supply chains are challenged everywhere. Consumer, demand has also dropped considerably. So therefore, I think now the BCP will focus on survival. So today, all the story that you need to write today is how do I survive the next 3 months? How do I make sure that things are operating? Then comes the sustenance period. So our sustainability is interdependent phase, right? You will need others. The market has a play. The government has a play. The different forms of what is it? Incentives that the government will provide us will also add to the buoyancy factor going forward. So that will come in at the second stage, and of course stability and growth is obviously will happen once we are over these two important phases. So I think we will be able to manage this, but I think the survival lessons would have to be put together very quickly. Large and small companies, especially startups and MSMEs and SMEs, will have to come to a huddle, look at what they have, how do they distribute what they have, how do they utilize what they have, and build a plan around that.
Great. So let's come to a few questions that we've got. And the first being from Prakash. Munesh, if you want to take this. He asked, will the continuity of business depend on the nature of business?
I think it's a pretty interesting question for sure. And like I said, there cannot be a one size fits all. And the nature of business is, I think, completely unconnected with continuity, because the nature of business depends on why did that entrepreneur start it in the first place. And we have all heard of business evolution, right? So for example, we've heard of large corporations having started their business trying to produce or sell A, And today their entire, if you look at conglomerates, they are not doing A anymore, they're doing A plus B plus C plus and a lot of other things. So there is diversification, and diversification, if you go back and study why did the diversification happen, there would be a clear business context to it, there would be a situational context to it, so on and so forth. So when you write down a continuity plan, it also gives entrepreneurs an opportunity to identify what next from here. And like Jerry rightly said, how do I survive next 3 months? If my survival in next 3 months means that I have to slightly change the course of my business, that has to find the space in my business continuity plan. And that is what I would say as a response to saying that yes, the nature of the business has a strong correlation, but it has to find a space in the continuity plan, and also look at the surrounding opportunities, because we are in a new normal, right? We have a new equation around us, we have a new set of variables around us, we have a new set of constraints around us. When that impacts the nature of our business, what else do? We need to figure that out, and we need to look at emerging opportunities surrounding the core purpose of our business.
Great. Next question, Jerry. I think you are perfectly placed to answer this. Ashish Nagpal says, and I think it might be the case with a lot of people. He's saying, I may find it difficult to pay my suppliers immediately. I am afraid of IBC provisions. What can be done?
Ran, I'm so sorry. You may have to repeat that question. The last
Okay.
portion of it I again lost.
Okay. So
So,
Ashish Nagpal asks, I may find it difficult to pay my suppliers immediately. I am afraid of IBC provisions. What can be done?
see, I think one good thing is, there is already a suspension so far as IBC proceedings are concerned right now. And what is most likely to happen is that we don't know whether the moratorium of IBC will continue to exist even after things stabilize, because I think that is when right now suppliers as well as the ones who are paying for the supplies are all keeping quiet because they believe that the situation will change soon. But the pace at which the situation may probably change for me may not really change in the same pace for you. So therefore, what will happen is you probably are not able to pay me as quickly as I expect to be paid after the COVID situation is over. Now, that is something which we will have to evaluate on a case-by-case basis. And I think what is most important is to avoid, matters of dispute, matters of claims, is to keep the other side informed. I think that is basic business protocol. And as long as your creditor knows that you are not you are delaying a payment for very genuine reasons, okay, and these are reasons beyond your control, I'm sure that if he were to go into a dispute, or if he's ill advised to go into a dispute at this stage, I'm sure he will not be very successful as well, because I think the principles of equity and dispensation in those matters will apply in some form. It's not that our legal system is completely blind to these realities, and they will function around these realities. And so I'm sure that people who believe that they have stronger cases will also have to rethink their strategy.
Right. Monish, an interesting question has just come in. I am not really able to figure out who the speaker is, but the person says, if I need to keep an emergency fund, considering any pandemic in the future, how much should I really keep?
See, I think this is I really love this question. Okay, I think there is no rule for this, and I think if we go back and if you go back and look at the basic rules of financial management, two examples I'll give you. Strong companies' balance sheets always show great reserves and surplus. Number one, and well-managed families always show a very good track record of how earnings are converted into savings, right? So I think these are the two things I will draw upon. And if any business is forward looking, I think you will have to, and I would go back to the very first sentence with which we started this webinar. You said, Pran, is that it's all about saving for a rainy day, so it's every business has different dynamics. I don't think there's a compartmentalized rule that we could keep aside, say X percentage, month on month from our earnings, etc. But I think it's all about taking these judicious calls in a timely manner. what's important is that if I have the ability to save X in my business today, and if I can set aside, as a part of my, reserves, or a, is call it simple. It could be as simple as an innovation fund, or it could be a R&D fund, or it could be a simply money kept aside for a, capex planned for next year. A new plant needs to be drawn up. Everything needs to be planned for. It does not happen out of the blue. It does not happen on an ad hoc basis. And business growth has to be sustainable. So it all boils down to this. So I wouldn't recommend a quantification, but a best effort basis.
Right. Jerry, if
So
I come to
I
you.
basically had
Oh,
a,
yeah.
sorry, Pran. I just
Yeah,
had a
please.
point there. So, and this is, so when I asked my financial advisor, right? So how much money, I mean, because I'm a professional and, we can probably, lose our opportunity at any given point of time. So I was asking him, what do you think would be an ideal amount I should try and maintain, to continue with the state, to continue with the standard of living that one has. So what he suggested was an ideal position would be to have equivalent to 1 year of your earnings, right?
Hmm.
Is what you should keep aside as some form of liquidity or some form of savings. So you never know. I mean, how bad your your dry spell could go on for a long time. But it again depends. It depends on the aspiration of each person, the risk, the risk capability of each person. And maybe like there are some startups I work with, Manish and Pran, and they are very practically, because they are bootstrapped and cash flows are minimal. So they are all functioning at, a cash flow pattern of between 3 to 4 months. So they have reserves, between 3 to 4 months, and that is how they largely try and function. In fact, there was one promoter who set up. I mean, he was working in a multinational, and he came up with this very bright idea, and is now in the round of raising funds. So when he was speaking to us, the first thing he did is when he capitalized the company for an equal amount, he just opened a simple FD in a bank and deposited an equal amount of the capital into the bank, which was at that point of time quite sizable actually. And he said this is just going to be a contingency fund, and that was his personal fund. He didn't move it into the company, and he didn't capitalize it at that point of time. But people do interesting things in this space. So I think one big lesson that a lot of people have learned is to maintain reserves. Yeah.
Great. So next question, Jerry, I'll stay with you. Ravi Darshan says, what can be the drawbacks of enforcing force majeure?
Uh, See, force majeure works in different situations, right? I think the jurisprudence presently on force majeure, in so far India is concerned, is quite clear. Okay, so basically it says that one cannot use a force majeure clause for his own benefit when he really had an obligation to perform. Okay, so that being the general principle and jurisprudence, one needs to enforce or invoke a force majeure clause with some level of care and responsibility, because just because you see a FM clause in a contract, it doesn't mean to say that you are in a good position to seek abeyance of payment or discharge of your obligations. I think you will be running into a legal issue, as well as you will also be destroying the kind of trust, the underlying trust in the whole contractual relationship with the other side. So you have to be very careful. Couple of things, just to be very specific and to the point in responding to this question, is that please read the force majeure clause that is provided in the contract. What is the definition of force majeure, and what are the consequences of force majeure? If these two things you believe are well drafted in the contract and squarely fall and cover your present situation, then please approach the other side, other party, and say, hey, you know what? I think we have this clause, and this is a clause which which gives me the power to invoke this. So please, can we discuss about this? But what we've seen of late, and we've spent several nights in discussing issues which clients have raised with us, is on invoking force majeure clause on not not structurally well drafted clauses. Okay, because nobody imagined that we will ever have a force majeure situation. So force majeure will largely limit itself to an act of God, And what tends to happen in the case of interpretation is what is pandemic. So, so these become, a matter of interpretation of facts and law and precedents. So therefore, I think one should not excessively go and take umbrage or protection under a force majeure clause just because it exists in your contract.
Great. Monish, someone is asking, again, I can't really figure out the name, says, is a practice drill recommended as a part of BCP implementation?
Yeah, I think it is absolutely. I think good that that question got asked. I think rehearsing is a part of our lives, right? Even when we are students, we have written preparatory exams before going to the finals. When we have Jerry and I are both professionals. When we go and make pitches to our clients, we rehearse with our teams before going and making client presentations. So rehearsals are part of life. I think there's never something to lose if you have to prepare for for the future. So absolutely.
Right. Jerry, Pratik Sehgal is asking, if I file for insolvency, tell me very frankly, what are the chances of a turnaround after that?
I would love to have had some more clarity. So, is he seeking to file for insolvency himself, or is he
That is
fighting for
all.
insolvency?
I think
Yeah.
he wants to file himself.
Okay, so basically, like filing for insolvency, right? Inability
Yes.
to pay. I
Mm.
see the insolvency process is itself time consuming right now the way it works in India, right? So one files a petition, after it is admitted, then there is a 240 days moratorium, during which period an insolvency professional is appointed, and then once he comes on board, he validates and evaluates the company, and then decides whether there is a restructuring that is possible for a company, or whether the company really needs to be wound up. This itself is time consuming. This itself is a costly process. It is not easy. Okay. So before you decide to do an insolvency kind of a proceeding, please think about it. Because of course, if you're heavily leveraged on debt and there is no other way, and thankfully, and assuming that you as a promoter haven't given any personal guarantees, okay, and if it's purely dependent only on the company's assets, and if there is absolutely no other way, and this is the only way that you're going to exit from the business, and also probably dilute your liabilities to the extent possible, then I think you can consider it.
Okay. Uh, the next question, Monish, if we can take this. It says, should cash flow also be a part, managing cash flow be also a part of BCP?
100% without a doubt. In fact, when I was referring to short-term liquidity, that's precisely what I was pointing at. You do need to you need fuel to run your car. You need cash to run your business. I think in terms of managing customer expectations, advancing deliveries, producing on an emergency basis. Now that the relaxations are slightly in place and will start getting more and more normal, I think automatically that will mean that your need for cash also gets altered. So cash flow forecasting is an absolutely integral part of putting this whole plan together, because that will give businesses a very clear perspective on how many like Jerry was saying, right, 1 year of earnings. So that's he knows then that much of fuel is left, right? So in the same way, from a business continuity standpoint, if you have to continue to service your customers against existing orders, you need to produce. You know how much stock you have on hand, what more you need, how much of money you need to pay your employees to sort of keep them going on their salaries. It all boils down to a very quantifiable mechanism through which you can really put a finger on a page and say, this is where my cash flow requirements are. I have so much of funds, I need so much of funds, and I may not need any funds. I may be self-sufficient right now. But to find out where I stand in relation to the business situation, it is extremely important to have the cash flow positions incorporated into the business continuity plan. And the other aspect around incorporating cash flows into the business continuity plan is, like I said, every part of the business continuity plan has a certain set of constraints and variables that impact it. And because we are in a situation like we are, we know that there are 3 or 4 things that will impact our cash flows. A good example of that is my customers delaying payments to me. So my inflows are automatically impacted. Now, what do I deal with it? What are my alternative sources of funds? So unless I put all of this down into the plan, I will never be able to analyze it. It's not a static position, but it's a moving position. So for me to understand the impact of a moving position, it better find its place in the business continuity plan.
Manish, this is not a question that we've got, but I'm just wondering aloud. Are there professional helps available to small businesses in case they cannot do it themselves? Do you recommend professional help? Are there professional helps available?
No, of course, I think there is professional help all over the place in relation to this. Our the entire financial sector is there. There are professional certified professionals available to help businesses draw out their short term as well as medium term and long term liquidity plans. We ourselves assist several large business houses in terms of restructuring in the current situation. So yes, there is professional help available. There could also be it depends. If it's a very small business, there could be a back of the envelope calculation, as I might call it, to see what do I really need to do immediately, and just to take those baby steps. And then professional help is always available, right? So I think a little bit of self preparation followed by professional help is probably the right way.
Right. Jerry, I think you can take the next question. So yes, we did see the unfortunate incident yesterday of the gas leak down south when this company LG was trying to reopen after a lockdown. What can be the precautions against such mishaps not happening and how to deal with it?
So, I think when a plant is shut down, right? So, and it's not been operational, and especially if it's a manufacturing plant, if it has hazardous chemicals, the legislation itself says there is a SOP which they need to follow. And that SOP needs to be, complied with. And it also goes down to just reiterating the kind of business discipline that companies have. What probably happened here in this case was, one is negligence, obviously, and secondly, they probably did not assume that the fact that the plant was not operated for so long would have had very different impacts in the way the whole plant reacted. So that there is really there is no other better way rather than having standard operating processes and making sure that these things are taken care of. So it's as simple as this, right? You have your two-wheeler and you have your car, right? You haven't used your car now for the last 40 days. I'm sure you're not going to crank it and throttle it immediately, right? Your engine is going to seize or some problem is going to happen. You're first going to see if there's oil, if your radiator still has your coolant, and then you're going to, turn on the engine. So I think these kind of precautions will have to be taken, and companies will have to make sure that they have these norms in place. There is really no other excuse.
Great. I think if you have to summarize, Monesh and Jerry, after that, I am the small business owner. If you have to summarize what we have all discussed, in this 1 hour, in terms of how do I draw a BCP, um, top three things that come to your mind, Monesh first, then Jerry, you.
Yeah, so Pran, I think first of all, thank you. This has been a really good interaction, and thanks to my co-panelist Jerry here for the insights I've also learned from him during this interaction. I would simply say that there are basically 4 clear action items, that have come through our entire discussion today, which is basically all pointed towards small businesses or medium-sized businesses building resilience and allowing them to reshape their results. So simple 4 actions. I always put people on top of any priority list. So I'll begin with the first action is, how do you put your people safety first? That has to be the first ingredient from a continuity planning perspective. Second, and I know we have not spoken much about this, but I want to put that back into my summary, is communicating with the stakeholders of the business. Every business has so many stakeholders. The most obvious ones are employees and customers, but there's a whole lot of other stakeholders. It could be your creditors, it could be suppliers, your regulators, so many things. So I think keeping active communication with your stakeholders during and after situations like we are in is integral part of planning. Third is to reshape strategy. We talked a lot about business plans, budgets, operational risk, financial risk, to basically reimagine your business strategy itself at the onset and put that into the plan. That is going to be very critical to ensure that there is continuity in business. And last but not the least, I think to put all forces behind building resilience and preparing the organization to recover. That will be the last action, in my point of view. So simply put, I would summarize it into these four clear actions: putting your people first, communicating with stakeholders, reshaping your strategy, and rebuilding your resilience.
Wonderful. Jerry?
Thanks, Monesh. You kind of summarized the discussion so well. I really have no additional points to give. And also, Pran, thank you very much for having us and to share some of our thoughts. As concluding points, I just have one or two points which I want to kind of stress upon. Is that business continuity planning as such, right? Today, a lot of companies will be looking at what next, what is the best thing that's available. I think this is this time when entrepreneurs and companies would have to be superbly opportunistic. Do not let any opportunity go by. This is also a time when you make hay when the sun shines. So if you are a software provider and you've been licensing your software for a significant price, slash the prices, give people the user experiences, onboard new customers, engage with new people in the market, and build references. I think this is a great time to do that because uh, more people come together and you build stronger bonds at the time of distress. And this is a good time to build those strong bonds, and I think they really work. Uh, the second most important thing is whenever the government comes up with any incentive or scheme, please do not hesitate and say that maybe this will not work for me, maybe this is going to be too time consuming. Don't let that lethargy or delinquency seep into your system. Try hard and apply whatever it may be. You never know. Any funding, any stimulus which gets into your bank is fantastic, right? So I think that you should keep your ears and eyes open to it, and I'm sure that the government will come up with a few more stimuli in the next couple of weeks, is what we all hope, and we are quite sure it will happen. So if these things, and keep yourself robust and energy. We are not alone, right? The whole world is going through this, and I think that itself is an optimistic position to start life from. And we hold each other through this. That's about it.
Great. Thank you, Jerry. I think you summed it up really well. And when you say that we are not alone, that is the truth. And I think I cannot, stress less the importance of planning. And if this pandemic has a lesson for us, it is probably the need to plan. And that is all the time we have for today. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Monesh, for taking our readers through the process of BCP and answering all our questions. To the viewers, thank you for joining us as always, and we hope we could be of some help to you. Goodbye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.